So today I'm working on canvas board, and I did have a painting underneath this which I didn't like, so I've just painted over it in white acrylic paint and waited for that to dry. So that's what I'm using today. So first of all, I'm just going to give my brush a rinse. And first of all, we're just going to mark out exactly where things are going to go. So just taking a little bit of my deep turquoise, and this is really just to sort of plan out exactly where things are going to go. This is not going to be the colour of the water. And then I'm just going to rinse that out, and just using a bit of green, I'm just going to mark where the trees are going to come to, which is going to be to about here. And then using a bit of the raw umber, I'm just going to mark out exactly where the ledge of stone is going to come to. Okay, so that's like my rough guide of where things are going to go. So to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop in the background of the sky. So I'm just going to take white straight out of the tube and pop that in. So now I'm going to start working from the top of the canvas down, and I'm going to give my brush a really good rinse out, and I'm actually going to start with a little bit of black here, which I don't use very often, but obviously in a waterfall we love the contrasts between the dark shadows and the brightness of the water. So using a little bit of black, I'm just going to, squinting at my reference photo, I'm just going to start popping in those areas of shadow where I can see them. So I'm just using the very tip of my paintbrush here just to pop in some of those rough sort of strokes. So I'm not going to go straight in heavily with the black paint. And I'm just going to do the same the other side. So the gaps that I'm leaving in white, I'm going to go back in a minute with some green. Give your brush a really good rinse out. Next I'm going to work on the background in the middle. So we want some raw umber and some white, because as we spoke about in previous videos, the further away in the distance something is, the sort of lighter and less tonal value it has. So using that raw umber and white, I'm just going to, again, very lightly with my paintbrush, and just not really putting in particular brush strokes, just using it very lightly in different directions and letting the canvas pick it up as I go. And don't worry at this point if you're making a few mistakes, because we can go over it and fix it later on. And this is what impressionistic painting is all about. It's using suggestions and leading the eye to believe it's something else, rather than telling people exactly what to see. And then I'm going to take that same colour, but maybe a little bit darker in colour, so not as much white, and I'm going to start bringing that into these trees here. Okay, and then give your brush a really good rinse off. So next I'm going to take some sap green and I'm going to add that to the raw umber mixture we've got here. So if it's coming out a little bit green, what we want to do is add a bit more raw umber and a bit of white. So basically I just want a bit of a dingy colour of green because, as we've just been saying, in the background it's not as bright green as we're going to have in the forefront here. So we want to give the illusion of distance. And you can see it starting to come together now, ish. And give your brush a rinse off. Now I'm going to go in with some green and raw umber. And I'm going to, instead of filling in this part in the distance, I'm going to start adding it from about here, because this is where the more sort of green tones are coming in. And I'm going to bring this right up to the edge and come right down here. Okay, so I'm just going to make some more of that colour, so that was green with a bit of raw umber. And again, I'm going to come a little bit into the distance here. And we can use our paintbrushes for different shapes. So if I do it this way, I can create more of a line and cover more area, or I can use the corner, some more concentrated areas. And the harder you push on, the more of a mark it's going to leave. And we can also go over some of the black areas just to make it have a little bit more depth. Okay, and then give your brush a rinse out. And now I'm going to take some green straight from the tube, and I'm going to bring this just down the sides. And I'm going to also pop in a little tree here that's quite in the forefront. And also there is a bit of greenery just here. Okay, so now to bring out some highlights in those trees, I'm just going to add a little bit of white to this mixture that we've got here. And we're going to use just the tip of our brush just to pick up some highlights. In the trees. And then once you're happy with that, just give your brush a really good rinse out. Now just looking at it, I feel like this line is a bit too diagonal. So I'm just going to take some black and I'm just going to start eating into that shape. Just to break it up a little bit. So I'm just going to rinse that out again. Okay, so now we're going to start on the waterfall section. So once again, we're going to start off with some black for the shadows. I usually like to work sort of in the middle and coming out, or from the outsides and working in, just so you can have a reference point to exactly where you are. So I'm going to start from this edge and I'm going to start bringing this black down here. And all the time I'm looking back at my painting and back at the reference photo, back at the painting, back at the reference photo. And as always, unless specifically you want it to look exactly the same, we don't have to make it look exactly the same. We're just using it as a reference. That doesn't always mean exactly copying it. That just means that we're taking inspiration from the photo. And for the rocks, this is why I love these paintbrushes with a flat edge, because you can use it to go sideways and up and down, and it'll keep some of those hard edges in there, which really mimics the rocks. And don't worry for now if we're going over the top of the parts that we'd put out for the waterfall, because we can go back over that again. This bit here, I want the blackest area, because this is where the contrast is going to be next to the water, and that's going to really bring it to life. And I'm also going to start filling up some of this area ready for the trees. But if you feel more comfortable, you can work on the waterfall and the rocks and then the tree in the foreground later. So once you've done that, just give your brush a really good rinse off. Next, I'm going to go in with my raw umber. So I've got quite a lot on my paintbrush this time, and I'm sort of going to go around the black areas and just fill in a few of those holes. Keep moving your paintbrush in different directions, and that's just going to free it up a little bit. And I'm also using the canvas to bring out some highlights naturally, so I'm not going to press on too hard. Okay, and then give your brush a rinse off. Now what I want to do here is, because we've got so much green in this painting, I want to use a little bit of pink in there, because that is the opposite colour with the CMYK wheel. So what I'm going to do is take some of this magenta, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of brown. So we've got sort of like a dull magenta colour, and I'm going to just bring this into the rocks ever so slightly. And what that's going to do is just create a bit more contrast in colours. So I'm using the CMYK wheel as my reference, but also this applies to your red, green and your blue. So what we're doing is we're keeping all elements of the colour wheel in our painting. I think that'll do. I want maybe a little bit in this tree as well, but I don't want too much magenta to take it away. So I'm going to rinse my brush off with that, and now I'm going to take some raw sienna, sorry I keep saying raw sienna, raw umber, and I'm going to add a little bit of white to that. Looking at my reference photo, I'm just going to start to pull in a few of those highlights. Okay, and then I'm going to take some more white and add it to the same mixture. So we don't want white, we want sort of like a very, very light brown. And once again, I'm just going to pick up, not as many, I'm just going to use the corner of my brush this time. I'm just going to pick up a few of those highlights. Also, we've got a rock here, so I'm not going to put it in completely, but I'm just going to map out a little bit where that's going to go. Okay, and rinse your brush out. So next I'm going to add a little bit of green to this same mixture, and this is going to be the mossy sort of parts of the photograph. So I'm I'm going to sort of not blend it in, but keeping the brush strokes, again, very free. Just going to add that into some of the areas that we've just put on. And then taking some green straight out the tube and using just a corner of my brush, I'm just going to dot on some of those areas a little bit more strong in colour. Okay, and then I'm going to rinse that out. Then I'm going to add just a little bit of white to this green mixture and pick up a few highlights on top of the green that we've just put on. So this is just like where the sun is catching onto that moss. We don't want to do too much, but okay. And then rinse off your brush. Now there's still a section in this middle bit that we've not done yet, and this is where the rock is wet and it's sort of reflecting the sky, and I can almost see a bluey tinge. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some blue and I'm going to add in a little bit of raw umber. You want it to be like a bluey brown colour. And then just going to start feeling my way with this and popping it in different areas. We don't want to coat it on, we just want little highlights of it. And then I'm going to add a little bit of white into that and just pick up some highlights in the rocks. As I say, we don't want too much, we just want to give that sort of feeling of it reflecting. I think that will probably be enough. I'm just going to add a little bit over here and maybe a tiny bit here. Okay, I think that's enough, so I'm just going to rinse my brush out. And then what I'm going to do now is take quite a large amount of white and mix it with a tiny bit of raw umber and a bit of green. Still got a little bit on my palette that I can use. And I just want to pick up only a tiny bit of highlights here. Okay, that's enough, I think. Okay, so I think that's it for now. We can always add a little bit more shadow afterwards. So wash your brush out, and what we're going to do, we're going to take some white and just popping it on the end of your brush, we're just going to dot in the areas where we want the water to come from. So again, this is going to be more of a reference than straight away us adding it in from here. I'm just going to dot it a few times and then drag, dot and then drag, just to sort of get the motion of the waterfall. And I'm only doing this very, very lightly. I'm barely pressing on at all. Okay, and just here again, I'm just going to dot and then drag. And this side, this time, instead of using it that way, I'm going this way because this one's a little bit thinner. And as you can see on the reference photo, obviously it's more white at the top in these areas, so I've popped it like a loose area in, and then I'm just going to add it in a little bit more concentrated there at the top. And then the same for this area, it's going to be a lot more concentrated at the top. So I'm just going to add in more and then dot in it again as we come down. Okay, I feel like we've maybe gone a little bit too strong on the whites here, so what I'm going to do is take some black and raw sienna, and then just at the top here you can see there's a few stones, so I'm just going to add them in to start with. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some white to that. Till you get a greyish colour, and then I'm just going to sort of blend that in over the top and here as well, and also a little bit here. Again, I'm using the brush very, very lightly on the canvas, just dragging it over. Okay, and then rinse it off. And then just again, I'm just going to, using the very end of my brush, pop some white on the very tips, and then just like we did before, I'm just going to dot that on top of what we've just done. We can use the water quite thickly right now. We can use the paint quite thickly, and I'm just going to add different parts thicker than others. So especially down this side is very thick white paint. Okay, and just keep going until you're happy with it. I'm just going to add in a little bit of a thicker area here. And then sparser areas right here. Okay, and then I'm going to rinse off my brush. Okay, so next we want to add this tree in. So what I'm going to do is, we've already added a bit of black and raw umber. So next what I'm going to do is take some green, and I'm going to add it with some raw umber. And I'm just going to pat in some of the areas that are currently white. Okay, and then rinse off. Then I'm going to take some green straight from the tube, and I'm going to add that over the top in the areas where you can see that it's most green on the reference photo. And then with that green, I'm going to add in some white till you get a nice vibrant green, and quite lightly I'm using the tip of my brush just to pick out some of those little highlights on the branches. And here again we can use the straight flat edge of the paintbrush, or we can also use the corner for some more concentrated areas. And this takes a little bit of practice, so don't worry if you don't get it first time. If you do it and you don't love it, you can always paint over that with the raw umber and black again and start this section from the beginning. I'm going to freestyle a little bit here and go over the waterfall just to create a little bit of interest. And for the top bit, what I'm going to do is make a grey. So I've got black and a bit of white, and I'm going to add in a little bit of magenta just to give it a bit of warmth. Because this tree up here, you can see it's not as green as the one underneath it. And then I'm going to add a little bit of white to that, just to pick out some of the highlights on those leaves. Okay, and then I'm going to wash my brush out. Then I'm going to go in with some black again to create a bit of contrast, and I'm going to bring back some of those shadows, also linking into the rocks behind. And I'm also going to bring this down to the rock area, and you can see it's sort of a blackish colour right underneath the rock, so I can add that in. And we're going to add in the rocks next. So we want some raw umber, and we can add it with some green. So I've got some green here already on my palette, so I'm just going to mix it together with that. I'm just going to pop in some of that area and then rinse that off. And then just with plain raw umber from the tube, we want to add in exactly where these rocks are going to go. And then mixing with some raw umber, we want some white. And going over the top of what we've just done can bring out more of a bit of a rock shape. And then we can go lighter still with even more white and dab in the brush on to bring out some highlights. Okay, and then rinse off your brush. And you can see on the photo some mossy greeny colours, so I'm going to take some green and I'm just going to dot that onto the rocks. And then I'm going to take some black, and again, to add in that contrast, I'm just going to pop in a few areas of shadow. Okay, and then rinse your brush off. Okay, so now for the water. So first of all, we're going to use some black and deep turquoise. I'm also going to add in a little bit of green, because obviously the water is not only reflecting the sky, but it's also reflecting the trees. So we want a really sort of turquoisey colour here, like a jewelly green turquoise. And we want it to be quite dark, so once we've got that, we're just going to paste it in all over. Okay, so I'm going to make some more of that mixture again. So it's deep turquoise and green and a bit of black. This time I've added quite a lot of black because we're going to pop in some shadows. So we want to come up here and just underneath the waterfall is where it's going to be darkest underneath, so I'm just going to add that in. And then also around the rock we want to come down here. As you can see, it's quite dark here. and also in this corner area. And then we're going to take some white and we're going to add it to that mixture. And then using that, I'm just going to bring it down and sort of blend it in, using my brush going side to side, like a reflection from the waterfall. And I'm also going to do that along this area as well, coming right in underneath the rocks. Okay, and then rinse off your brush. Now we're going to take some raw umber and add it to that mixture and a bit of white. And we're just going to bring this from the rock and just use a backwards forwards motion, add in this reflection from the rocks. Okay, and then rinse your brush out. Okay, so now we want to take some white and add it what's left over to the water mixture, and we want a very, very light version of it. And over the top of these reflection marks, we're going to go over the top with some more. And also, again, going side to side with my brush, touching the canvas very, very lightly. Okay, and then rinse off your brush. Okay, and then I'm going to get some black and some raw umber, and I'm just going to sort of blend in this line into the background. So where I can see it goes very dark, I'm just going to blend that up. Going up into the rocks. Okay, and then I'm going to rinse off. Actually, while I've still got that on my brush, I can see I need to add a bit more shadow into these trees, so I'm just going to dot in some little areas of shadow here. And again, just taking some black while this is all now drying. We're now waiting for this bottom area to dry. We may as well work on other parts of the painting. So I'm taking some black and adding in a few more areas of deep shadow. To give our painting even more contrast. Okay, and then give your brush a good rinse out. Okay, so while we're waiting for this bit just to fully dry before we can blend in some of the waterfall smash in the water, I'm going to pop in the rest of the highlights that are on the water. So taking just the very end of my brush, I'm going to dip it into the white paint, and just like before, I'm going to pop in some of those areas that are a lot brighter. When it's fully dry, we're going to add in that sort of haze that you can see. thought it was a good time to add some of this sparkling white that you can see on the sea where the water is reflecting, well, basically, I think it's the sky. I think it's basically the sky reflecting on the water. Okay, and when you're happy with that, rinse your brush out. And as always, I'm going to add that shadow back in. So I'm going to take some black, some blue, and some green. And I'm going to add quite a lot of black into this mixture again. And I'm just going to add in a few little darker areas, again, just to bring into that contrast. And rinse your brush out. Okay, so we're nearly there, guys. You just want to wait for that to completely dry now. Okay, so now we're going to add in that sort of haze that you can see around the base of the waterfalls. So take some white on the edge of your paintbrush and just get rid of the excess to make sure you've got white on there, but it's not a big blob. And what we're going to do, using a circular motion, just going to go around the base. And you can bring this haze up as far as you like. And once you've done that, then you can take white, quite a lot of white directly from the tube. Again on the end, so we're in control, but a lot more paint. And we can really dab it on to make that area really concentrated with white. Okay, and then when you feel like you've done that, just rinse off your brush. So a really good step that really helps me to see a painting instead of looking at it close is to get my phone and take a photo of it. This helps you see the painting more as a 2D image and see what it looks like from a distance. And that way you can fix any areas that you're not quite sure on. And it also helps to hold up your picture of your painting up to the reference photo and you can see mistakes a lot more obviously. I think what I'm going to do to add in a bit of extra interest is some more white in the trees, because I can see in my reference photo there's some more white down here, and even down here into the trees. Also, I feel like this is a bit too much of a V shape, so I'm going to take that out a little bit. So obviously to do that I'm going to get some black and raw umber, and I'm just going to pop it on here. And I'm going to put that in a little bit higher instead. And then I'm going to take some white on the corner of my brush, and I'm going to add in a little bit of white in the trees. I'm also going to add a bit more of a white highlight onto this rock. And a little bit more here. Okay, I think that's pretty much finished.